So again, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in as we discuss financial aid and help you navigate this process at Montclair State University. My name is Rachel Mecca. I am one of the financial aid counselors here. My primary role is assisting students A through Z with financial aid, especially those actually on academic probation. So I don't believe any of your students will be in my caseload, but I have been in financial aid now for 14 years, and I look forward to assisting you through this. Again, please use the Q&A chat with any questions or concerns. I will address those inquiries throughout to the best of my ability, and we'll certainly take the time again after the presentation is over to make sure each of your questions are answered. So let's start. What is financial aid? Financial aid is a comprehensive umbrella term. When we talk about financial aid, we're really referring to any funds that are not basically funds that you're paying out of pocket or deriving from any source that you might know of on your own. So we're referring to grants, scholarships, loans, work study, primarily those awards that are driven either by merit or by financial applications like the FAFSA. And at Montclair State, we do not use the CSS profile. So filing the FAFSA is the way that you apply to financial aid here at the university. Different types of financial aid. When you apply to the FAFSA, we are evaluating your eligibility for the federal Pell Grants, SCOG, which is based on the eligibility, the remaining funds that we have given to us by the federal government, and the FAFSA filing date. We'll get into deadlines in a moment. The tuition aid grant, which is a state grant from New Jersey, you have to be a New Jersey resident for 12 months before you actually enroll at the university. So if a student is coming from out of state, they have to establish state residency for that full calendar year before they enroll at a New Jersey institution in order to potentially qualify for the tuition aid grant, and certainly when it comes to in-state tuition. Educational Opportunity Fund, EOF. Every college has a unique admissions process to EOF. We have a full-fledged department that handles the EOF program, along with a liaison within my office. So we have an EOF financial aid counselor that students can certainly contact with questions or concerns. But the way that you apply to EOF is by actually indicating your interest on your admissions application. And then the EOF office and our EOF financial aid counselor is in touch regarding additional documents that you will need to submit so that we can evaluate your eligibility. And Garden State Guarantee, which is a new state program that is for juniors and seniors in college based on income. So we'll go into that in a little bit of detail. When you're applying to financial aid, we're also referring to Stafford loans, Parent Plus loans, private loans, all different types of student educational loans. When your student is filling out the FAFSA, they actually are reviewed for Stafford loans automatically. There is no credit check. It's borrowed by the student, and there is a separate application that the student will complete to confirm their acceptance of those loans and to initiate processing of those loans. The Parent Plus loan, in order to have a parent apply to that, there is a credit check requirement, and the FAFSA is required to be filed as one of the eligibility criteria. The private student loans, anyone can apply, but there is a credit check requirement. So these are typically loans that a student is using after they've explored Stafford loans. Some families do compare Parent Plus versus private loans, but we do discourage students from applying on their own unless they have established credit history on their own. In most cases, a student will need a creditworthy cosigner for that. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A, and I'll be glad to address your concerns. Let's see. Okay, so other types of aid. When you fill out the FAFSA, we are evaluating your student's eligibility for student employment through the federal work study program. And work study, I believe there's another slide on this, but students can have the opportunity to secure a part-time job on campus. If they do not qualify for federal work study, Montclair State does have a matching program that will enable your student to apply to other part-time jobs. The pay scale is the same. The types of jobs are the same. The hours may even be very similar. In terms of time commitment, I would say most freshmen on average work about 4 to 5 hours per week. It is the student's responsibility to secure their own position, though we do have a job portal that they will log into when classes begin. And working on campus, student employment can be a fantastic opportunity because it allows students to earn a little bit of income while they're actually studying. So we understand, for example, in my office, that student employees, their first responsibility is to their studies, and that typically during midterms, finals, things like that, our students are studying. They are not usually working because their focus is on doing well in school. So it allows great job flexibility with understanding that students are on campus. They don't have to travel, so far. It's a really great way to begin your child's work history. And it allows for great mentorship, great ability to adjust on campus. So I do encourage student employment where possible. To qualify, you do have to meet financial eligibility criteria per the FAFSA, and funding comes from the government. So if the student is qualifying for federal work study, they are actually paid every other week out of a federal budget given to the department where they work. When it comes to students who do not qualify for work study, again, the pay scale and everything is the same, but they are funded through the department directly through Montclair State funds. Different types of private scholarships now. So these are funds outside of the FAFSA, and these are often opportunities that you're securing on your own through creative means. You're applying through the high school guidance office, who often has resources for students. In a lot of cases, your students are logging into a student portal like Naviance, for example, and they are applying to outside scholarships through that portal. Sometimes local libraries and agencies, businesses, civic organizations, churches may offer outside scholarships. A lot of times parents or guardians also work for employers or are affiliated with unions that offer outside scholarships to dependents. And Montclair State recently launched a partnership with Scholarship Universe, which is a portal where students can create an account. They can indicate various things about themselves, their major, their interests, hobbies, their year in college, and that will match them up with potential outside scholarships. So when we're referring to private scholarships, these are funds that are secured on your own through these types of organizations. And typically, it's not the primary way that you pay for school, but it can be really great at supplementing what you're offered through financial aid throughout the year. So this is something that students can apply to on their own throughout the year. I always encourage students to make a hobby of it, have a separate folder on their laptop every weekend or so when they have a little bit of downtime, applying to a couple of scholarships. And as they get more familiarized, with their educational program, so let's say their program of study, their major, those departments may offer scholarships as well. Or they may get involved in different organizations on campus where Montclair State has a chapter, whether that's through a fraternity or sorority or through a professional honor society. And they may offer private scholarships as well that your student can apply to. So as that student gets further in their educational career here, those types of opportunities just naturally evolve. But these are things that the student would have to apply to on their own. And in terms of payment and that sort of thing, every private scholarship organization will have their own policy on whether or not that check has to be remitted directly to Montclair State Student Accounts Office, whether or not they need proof of enrollment. Typically they do, or at least a copy of the bill. And usually these funds are applied to the student's account directly And in many cases, it can be really great even during the middle of the school year, because let's say you borrowed a student loan or you have a payment plan. If additional funds come through, the financial aid office is always glad to work with that student to reduce a loan they may have borrowed if they get a scholarship, or in the cases of those on payment plans, your payment plan will automatically adjust to account for that new fund that just got posted to their account. So definitely a worthwhile thing to explore, year round. Okay, waiting for the slides to go. So what is a FAFSA? There are a lot of misconceptions about the FAFSA. It is free. So there are a lot of scams out there. The correct website that you want to visit is studentaid.gov. The FAFSA is what we need in order to review you for federal grants, loans, the work study program, as I mentioned, or the matching Montclair State Student Employment Program. We call them student assistants. You won't see a student assistant position or opportunity on the award letter or on the college financing plan, as we call it. But we do vet you for work study eligibility first before you have the green light to look for student assistant jobs. Institutional grants, we encourage you to meet our filing deadline, which this year is March 1st. So you want to get onto studentaid.gov. We'll go into more depth about the FAFSA because there are big changes this year with it that will make filing the FAFSA easier for you. And the FAFSA is also sent not only to the college or universities where you're applying to, but it's actually also sent to New Jersey HESA, which is the state authority who reviews you for state grant eligibility. So when you fill out the FAFSA, you're indicating the colleges that your student is applying to. We get a copy of that as long as we're listed, and then the state automatically gets a copy of that too. Financial aid received will apply automatically toward tuition fees, campus housing, meal plans. Financial aid is not given to students directly. It's not sent home. It's always applied toward the bill first. Okay, so those big changes that I mentioned on the FAFSA. When you fill out the FAFSA, the federal government computes something, a number that they refer to as the student aid index. If you have other children in college who maybe attended earlier, or you're remembering back to your own college days, the federal government referred to this as the EFC, the expected family contribution. They are changing the formula as of the 24-25 academic year, which means a lot of big changes on the FAFSA itself, and they are using this new formula called the Student Aid Index. So we just have to keep in mind that when you hear SAI or the Student Aid Index, just if you're familiar with FAFSA, you have to retrain your brain now to think of the Student Aid Index. That's the new terminology and the new formula being used. It's determined through that federal formula. It calculates the financial need based on the information that you're reporting on the FAFSA. It's what we use to create your financial aid offer. And these are guidelines that we follow from the federal government. So the SAI will actually dictate how much in federal Pell Grant a student may receive, whether or not they'll qualify for Stafford subsidized versus unsubsidized loans, or some combination in between under the Stafford loan program. And it measures your family's financial strength in accordance with the FAFSA. There are still certain things that the SAI does not account for, such as the fact that we live in New Jersey with that cost of living difference, as opposed to maybe if a student were applying to colleges within, let's say, the state of Nebraska. So it is definitely much more, I would say, streamlined or normalized against the national standard. But in terms of the state eligibility, that's where HESA comes in with state aid. So, the FAFSA is great. We do use it. And HESA has their own formula that they're using to determine the state eligibility piece of this. We also use the SAI when we're looking at institutional aid eligibility. So let's see here. And I just saw the Q&A jump up as soon as I mentioned SAI. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions on this. And again, with HESA, you do not have to have a separate application for general state aid eligibility. There are some state scholarships and things that may require a separate application, but just by filing the FAFSA, the state of New Jersey gets that copy and they do their evaluation. So we'll jump into the state aid portion. The FAFSA is open to US citizens and to qualifying permanent residents only. International students cannot apply to the FAFSA. If a student is undocumented or qualifies under DACA, they would not fill out the FAFSA. Instead, as a student who graduated from a New Jersey high school, has established residency within New Jersey, that student would go on to the HESA website, njgrants.org, and they would fill out an alternative application, which we have a couple slides on, so we'll go into that as well, but they would not qualify for the FAFSA. The FAFSA application is opening up at the end of this month. We don't have an exact launch date yet because, again, it's very new. So usually the FAFSA is open as of October 1st. Because of all of these changes, that release date has moved to the end of December. And schools nationwide will not begin to receive your FAFSA copies until the end of January. So this does mean that basically you will not receive a college financing plan from Montclair State or any other school until the end of January at earliest. And that's simply because the government has this whole renovated FAFSA, and they are taking several weeks longer to pass that information on to us. So what can you do to prepare? Know first that the FAFSA does use something called prior year income. This means that for the fall 2024, spring 2025 academic year, we will be using 2022 income information on the FAFSA. This will automatically be pulled over if you filed a 2022 federal tax return. We'll get into that with some slides so you can see what it looks like. But it is going to be pulled in from the IRS on your FAFSA application automatically once you give consent for them to do that. And that will expedite processing because you will not have to manually have your tax return and try to fill things out. That will be verified there for you. For those who do not file tax returns, there will be the opportunity for you to list wages and indicate that you do not file a federal tax return. You will still need to give the IRS consent because as a non-filer, that will be verified by the IRS. So they will check that and say, okay, you do not file a federal tax return. We're just going to check our records and make sure of that. So everything's vetted through. The priority deadline is March 1st. Traditionally, again, because everything has changed, we moved our deadline from the traditional February 1st date. So just keep in mind this year, for the upcoming school year, our priority deadline is March 1st. That's what we're holding you to. And you want to make sure you have your FAFSA done by then. So how do you prepare for this? Let's get into that. This is where I recommend that you have good old-fashioned paper and pen handy, or you keep really good records because you're going to need to create multiple IDs here. The first person who should be creating an ID is the student. So the student will go to studentaid.gov first, make sure that each family member involved has a separate email address. You will need to have separate email addresses. So your student will create a login. They refer to it as an FSA ID, username and password. They will associate that with a separate email address. Make sure the email address that your child is using is not their high school email address, okay? This has to be a personal email address that they will have access to after they graduate from high school, because they may forget their FSA ID login at some point, and we don't want to see a student get locked out of their federal account that they need to fill out the FAFSA, that they may need to manage student loans one day. So definitely important for them to use that personal email address. Now, to fill out the FAFSA, it's the student who logs in and actually begins that application. Everything is filled out under the student's login. So you write that information down. This is Johnny's login, his FSA ID, username, and password. This is the email address that's associated with that. This is, clear cut in our records. Then let's say you have your student create their login. They can even do this now before the FAFSA is released, just to have the login ready to go. You log out of your student's account, okay? So your student will log out of their account, and now the parent in the household, the first parent in that household, will create a separate FSA ID for themselves using their own personal email address. If you are living in a two-parent household, and that's whether or not mom and dad or parents are legally married or not, you may be the biological parents of that same student and not married. If you're living together, you both will have to be part of the FAFSA together because you're in the same household. So just keep that in mind. If it's a two-parent household of any scenario, you each will need your own FSA IDs under separate email addresses. So parent one, parent two will need to create their own FSA IDs, and we need that for you so that you can each electronically sign your student's FAFSA at the end of that application. It verifies your identity, and we also need you to have your FSA ID login so that you can consent for the IRS to vet your tax information. If you're living in a single parent household, it's the parent in that household, traditionally who's providing more than 50% of the support, including primary residence of that student. It's not based on who actually claims that child from year to year. So you would be the one to have that FSA ID login. The other parent, if they plan on applying to a Parent Plus loan or something along the lines of that down the road, they may need eventually their own FSA ID to apply to that Parent Plus loan. But for purposes of the FAFSA, it's going to be based on that parent within the household. Okay, this is now where my Q&A is really jumping, and I expected this. We have some good questions here. If you already have an FSA ID, great question. So if you have an older child who is in college, this is not your first rodeo, you've been down this road before, you definitely want to use the same login for yourself. Where we see parents trip up sometimes is just in managing the paperwork for each of those college students. So you have to make sure that the new college student has their own FSA ID, has their own email address, and is the one filing the FAFSA, even though you are using the same parent FSA ID you have been using to sign this second college student's FAFSA application. Make sure also when you're creating these IDs that you're being very careful in the name, birth date, all that demographic and biographical information that you're listing. Sometimes siblings get information switched with one another. We don't want to see that happen because that will just cause delays in you having your FSA ID created. When you do create an FSA ID and you fill out the FAFSA, these things do get vetted through the Social Security Administration office. They are going through Homeland Security. So any mishap, like the wrong name with the wrong social, will slow things down for you. The important thing really with this is just accuracy. So take your time. There is no pressure in a sense. You have until March 1st. If you're going in now with the FAFSA not even being open and at least creating your FSA IDs, you're taking early action, and you'll be, a little bit more relieved by the time the application's actually open because you won't be scrambling to do as much at once. Now, we have another question about the number of students a family has in college. The SAI formula does not take that into consideration any longer. They account for this in a slightly different way within their formula. But Montclair State, we base our grant decisions off of the FAFSA too. So we will be looking at the SAI. We do not have the CSS profile or another way to really account for that. Typically, what we ask families to do is to receive their college financing plan, which gives you your offer. And then if you have special circumstances that you need to bring to our attention, you, of course, would be able to contact the financial aid office directly to communicate that. Of course, if you have multiple children in college and that sort of thing, we would welcome you to contact us if you have concerns. And generally, the admissions office, especially, once that college financing plan has been received and you've looked it over, there is a way to initiate an appeal for additional consideration if you feel like you have some sort of unique circumstance that the FAFSA is not accurately capturing. So, you know, really with that's something that will be looked at. Okay, let's continue through. We're going to get through the slides, and then I promise to round back to all of these great questions. This is what the FAFSA website looks like, again, at studentaid.gov. When you log in, when it finally does open, it's as easy as clicking Start a New Form. The FAFSA will allow you to also save your progress. So let's say, you know, you're really tired after work. Your new college student comes in and says, hey, we should get some of this FAFSA stuff done. Or maybe you're the one driving that action. And maybe halfway through you get hungry, right? You all stop, you need a break. You can save your progress and go back to it. So just make sure that you're always hitting that save button as you progress through the application so that you don't lose your spot. Again, the student will begin that FAFSA once they finish their portion. So the FAFSA is broken down by a student section. Once you get to the section asking about parent information, the FAFSA will no longer refer to parents as parents. This is another change for this upcoming year. And to be honest, I have to get used to the terminology myself. It will ask the parent as a contributor toward that child's education to complete their section. So your student will send, input your email addresses and your information, and you will get a link that will bring you back to your student's FAFSA so that you can fill out your portion, consent to the IRS release, as I mentioned before. And it's going to be kind of one of those things where I actually would find it helpful if you're doing this all together. If you have a laptop and your child has a laptop, sit side by side and do this at the same time. Of course, the FAFSA has mobile access as well. So you can do that on your phone too. But I'm a traditionalist. I like to have a full computer screen in front of me if you have to do it this way. Definitely make sure that you're looking at that, you know, as you go through and volley back and forth with one another. The reason why they send email links and that sort of thing is they're verifying your identity. They want to make sure that you are actually the parent going in, and confirming that this information is accurate, that we really do have the parent's consent for the government to pull your IRS information through. So I know it can seem a little bit confusing and cumbersome, but this is all in the name of protecting your identity. And we want to make sure that, you know, we have the correct information as well. So how is this looked at further with contributors? It's the student filling out that FAFSA. A contributor could be the single parent in the household. A contributor could be unmarried parents, as I mentioned before, but living together. Both of your financial information will be on there. Married parents, naturally, will both be considered contributors on the FAFSA. And you can see there that it's broken down regardless of what type of federal tax return you file. If you're married filing joint or married filing separate, the FAFSA will ask for both parents to still be on that FAFSA. With the separated and divorced parents, I know it becomes a little bit stickier of who actually provides that support. And again, traditionally, it's going to be the parent that the student is living the majority of their time with. It's not based on who claims that student, it's the one providing the majority of support. Or a contributor would be a widow, again, in a single parent contributor sort of fashion or view. There are some questions regarding the FSA IDs in the chat. Basically, everybody needs their own separate FSA ID. If you have multiple siblings in college at the same time, they cannot, or even at different times, like you had an older child who graduated college, that ID is unique to them. your other child will need their own ID associated with their own email address. For those just joining in, the FAFSA will become available at the end of the month. Montclair State's priority filing deadline is March 1st, and making sure that when you're creating FSA IDs, you're using email addresses that you have accessible to you that are personal email addresses. You do not want your student to sign up for their FSA ID with a high school email address. It has to be a personal email address that they are using on their own. So as I reiterated earlier, or mentioned rather, you have to provide consent to the IRS to pull your tax information or to confirm that you did not file a tax return. And so this is a screenshot of what it looks like. It's literally a green box with that consent language, and then you click continue at the bottom and you give them permission to do this. You actually will not see the financial information. They cloak it. They star it out so that it's a security measure. So you don't have to worry about, let's say, your student seeing how much you earn or what your financial situation is. If you don't have that level of transparency between them and you don't want them to be concerned with that, they actually will not see that information. The income, again, being used on FAFSA is prior year, 2022 in this case for the upcoming fall. You report your savings and investments as of the filing date. Okay, as of the date that you are filing the FAFSA, your family size is pulled from the tax return. We can make some adjustments to this, but there is a formalized review to do that. We would only consider that if there were significant changes in your household. So again, anytime you have a unique circumstance or something that you feel is not quite being reflected on the FAFSA accurately, since a lot can happen between 2022 and 2024. You would just get in touch with the admissions or financial aid office and we can provide proper guidance there for you. Okay. Assets and investments. What is considered an asset or investment? Savings, cash, checking accounts. Investments would be your stocks, your bonds, your CDs, money markets, property of a second home. You would report for a second home, your current market value, what would it sell for today. Some individuals have appraisals that they use for that, or they're using websites like Zillow to have sort of an estimate for us, minus the total outstanding mortgage. So they're saying if you have a second home, let's say that you're renting out, or even, for some reason, a second home that maybe you use as a vacation property, you take the current market value minus the outstanding mortgage, and the difference is what you report as an investment. We understand that there are real estate costs and lawyer costs, and you may not get your actual difference if you were to sell the property. That's not the point of what they're really looking at. They're getting a ballpark estimate with the consideration that if push came to shove, what would a family do to afford education? That's considered an asset that you have, that you could liquidate if you needed to get that ballpark amount toward paying for school. You are not reporting your primary home as an investment. Primary homes are excluded from the FAFSA and not reported at all. Businesses, you use your current market value minus any outstanding mortgages or debts. Farms, same thing, don't include that primary home. And all of this information is as of the date that you're filing the FAFSA. More hints and tips for completing the FAFSA is available at studentaid.gov. Again, some resources for you to have some downtime as you're reading through, maybe on a weekend, or let's say just in preparing for this, you make an afternoon of it. You go on studentaid.gov, you get the whole family signed up for FSA IDs as you may need to, and then you take some time exploring that website and getting familiar with it. Okay, step 3, you've submitted the FAFSA. I'm glad we got here 40 minutes into the presentation. You finally submitted the FAFSA. What happens next? You get a FAFSA submission summary via email from the federal government, from the Federal Student Administration Office. It's very important that you check this. The FAFSA is funky where there is some great built-in logic where, it's really effective at walking you through the application and skip logic in saying, okay, this doesn't apply to you, skip the next 5 questions. It really is pretty savvy that way. What the FAFSA is not great at sometimes is letting you go through, even if there are errors. It'll warn you, but if you press continue enough, sometimes it just lets you move forward, even though you may not have filled something out right. So the submission summary that they send you by email is fantastic at letting you know, hey, there's something not quite right with your application. You have to go back and check for this. I personally believe, again, after doing this for 14 years, that this new version of the FAFSA will reduce those types of errors because it's pulling over a lot of that financial data automatically. So it's just reducing the amount of questions you have to answer on your own, but it's not going to resolve all the issues. So definitely check that email for a heads up on what you might need to correct. So again, with filing the FAFSA, these things are vetted through the Social Security Administration, Office Homeland Security. You can list up to 20 schools for the FAFSA to get sent to. And again, the HESA agency of New Jersey, they do get a copy of this. So what are common errors? Let's go into that. Again, using the wrong Social Security number. We see this all the time. Constantly updating the FAFSA. You fill it out, you realize 3 days later, oh, I made a mistake. You go back in, you make another minor mistake. I go back in. Don't do that. The reason why you want to be very careful the first time around to avoid these small corrections is because every time you submit a correction, you're raising a little red flag to the government saying, maybe this family needs help. The best way to make sure they're doing this right is if we select them for audit. And if you get selected for audit, they refer to that as verification, which means that the financial aid offices will be in communication with your student then to collect tax documents and other documentation to make sure the FAFSA was filled out properly. That means that financial aid is subject to change, that we have to review the accuracy of what you reported. It is one of those things that is very normal. I would say we review hundreds, if not thousands of FAFSAs annually, but we want you to avoid that to the best of your ability, just because who wants to submit additional paperwork? So don't make constant updates to your FAFSA. If you're struggling with it, you have questions, concerns, contact us. We'll be glad to guide you through. And if you're applying to multiple schools, of course, most of you are at this point, the best way to get guidance would be to actually go to studentaid.gov and click their help or contact us section, because they have a whole dedicated call center that can assist you on the federal government's end through the Federal Student Administration. They also have a live chat. I personally prefer the live chat because you'll get one of the FAFSA agents on there and you can type in all that information. And then at the end of that conversation, they can email a copy to you. And now you have something for your records so that when you contact a financial aid office, you can pull that up and say, I spoke to the FAFSA customer service office. This is what they told me to do. This is the correction that I made. It just makes for a nice, easy way for us to see really what's been going on and to be able to assist you much easier. Common mistakes would also be not sure which parent to include on the FAFSA, so you're going back and forth, making a lot of adjustments or corrections there, as the above bullet mentions. Incorrect grade level. A lot of times high school students get confused by the FAFSA when it asks them what year in school they are. So just make sure they put they are a first year freshman if that's the case, or if they're transferring in, that they base it on the number of credits transferring in. And that they do not indicate they have a bachelor's degree. There's a question that says, will you have your bachelor's degree by such and such date? Sometimes students accidentally say yes, and then the FAFSA thinks that your freshman in college, upcoming, is a graduate student, and that completely changes eligibility. It will require you to have that FAFSA correction. So just double check those basic questions. Other types of things would be if your son or daughter lists themselves as an independent student by mistake. They have a dependent of their own, let's say. Be very careful about who you're filling information out for. Again, the FAFSA will start with the student section. It will literally say student information. So even if you're the one going into that application and helping them fill it out, make sure that when it says student information, that it's really speaking from the perspective of your student. They would answer those questions as themselves. And then under the parent section, that's when they're talking about it from the parent's perspective. And also incorrect marital status for parents. We see that happen from time to time as well. So again, for the FAFSA, we touched on this before, but they have to be a high school diploma or equivalent, like the GED. They have to have earned that. Enrollment in an eligible program, which includes bachelor's degrees, master's degrees and up. And if they're attending community college, an associate's degree, or if they're transferring in, they may have their associate's degree, and they would indicate on the FAFSA that they're going for their bachelor's degree then at Montclair State. They have to be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, like a permanent resident, and then a valid social security number. If the parent is not a U.S. citizen, I forgot to mention this, they would indicate all zeros on the FAFSA. They would not use their ITIN number necessarily. Sometimes with that new IRS consent, that parent will have to potentially put in an ITIN number, but definitely make sure that you're reading through that if you are a parent without that valid social, and if your child does have a valid social and will be filling out the FAFSA. Okay, state grants, we're getting through slowly but surely. I'm going to try to speed through some of this because I know that all of those FAFSA changes really bogged us down more than in past presentations, since so much new is coming out. In order to qualify for state aid, again, the state will get a copy of your FAFSA automatically, but there is a separate website where you will log in after you fill out FAFSA. Give it a few business days, even up to a week, and then go into njgrants.org. Now, your student will create a new username or password just for the state of New Jersey. It's not going to be their FSA ID login. You do not need to create your own as a parent, so you can have a break there. It's really just for your student to go in, and they would log in to see first that the state has their profile set up along with their state grant information. Make sure too, I forgot to mention this earlier, with the FSA ID, with any Montclair state records, even just the way they're filling out their admissions applications. For students that have unique spellings with, let's say, apostrophes or hyphenated last names, that you're inputting that student's legal name, their exact legal name, what appears on their birth certificate, what appears on their social security card, because a lot of times students will shorten that down, or they'll refer to themselves by a family name, like a shortened nickname, or, just one of those last names of the two. And then this creates a conflict of information, and the Social Security Administration can't confirm that student. The state of New Jersey has no idea who that student is because they're running it through the state system. Make sure that your son or daughter are going by their legal names, okay? The legal names, so that the information can pool properly. Along with their admissions application, anything that is going to be an official educational record should be based on their full legal name. There are ways, if there's ever a legal name change, that we can, of course, have that FSA ID updated and whatnot. And we're going to get into this more at orientation when we have accepted students and they're gearing up for this, on how Montclair State handles preferred names, because there is a way for a student to assign themselves a preferred name, or something along those lines within just the Montclair system. But when we're talking about legal documentation, or legally, applying for funds through the federal or state governments, we need to go based off of their legal name fully. And especially in hyphenated names, that's just something I've been seeing lately. Make sure you fully list that full hyphenated last name. So going back to the state profile here, I'm just mentioning this based off of a few cases that happened recently where students didn't, and they ran into trouble with the state of New Jersey and getting that fixed in a timely manner. that you also are just going on to NJ Grants, double checking accuracy, making sure that the state doesn't need anything else from you. Sometimes they do ask for additional information separate from the FAFSA, separate from what Montclair State or any other school might be requesting from you. So don't ignore anything coming from HESA, that's HESAA. You can go on to njgrants.org and make sure they have the FAFSA, make sure there's nothing else that they are requesting from you on their own to-do list. All right. State grants, EUF, mentioned it earlier. This is primarily geared toward students who are coming from educationally and demographically disadvantaged areas of New Jersey. A lot of first-generation college students too. In order to qualify, they have to meet certain income requirements. They would submit additional documents via Slate after indicating their EOF interest on their admissions application. And if accepted, students must attend a mandatory 6-week summer programs. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about that. That is a mandatory summer program that they must attend. So the EOF class is limited. If a student does not qualify for EOF as far as grant funding is concerned, but let's say the EOF class is filled up and now that student may still on paper look like they might be EOF eligible otherwise. If the EOF class is filled, those students that have shown eligibility after the fact, they will not qualify for grant funding, let's say, but they could still join the EOF community or department on campus as a student who can benefit from all of the advising resources, social events, and other advising supports that are provided to students within the EOF program. So we do get that question sometimes, what if, you know, on paper, it looks like I might qualify for EOF, but I'm told I'm not part of the EOF class because the class is full, or, you know, I forgot to check off the EOF program on my application and it's too late now. The EOF department can address those concerns, and primarily they would say, you may not be eligible for the EOF grant at that point, but you're certainly welcome to take advantage of all of the advising support that we provide to students. Mentioned it earlier about DACA or Dreamer statuses, that there is a New Jersey alternative app on the HESA website, and that's something that the student would fill out instead of the FAFSA. So students under DACA or Dreamer status do not fill out a FAFSA. They just apply through the state of New Jersey directly under a separate application. How do you qualify as an undocumented student? You have to have graduated or received a high school diploma equivalent from a New Jersey high school. You must have attended at least 3 years of high school within New Jersey. You have to be enrolled for at least 12 credits per semester at a 4-year New Jersey institution. Or if you are attending a 2-year college, a community college, then you have to be enrolled for at least 6 credits if you were coming to Montclair, you know, as a transfer student. There may be additional requirements and paperwork that a student would need to submit, including an affidavit every year. That affidavit is basically a statement saying that if there becomes a legal pathway towards citizenship, that the student would be, you know, pursuing that with the United States of America, and that parents of dependent students, you know, may not be full citizens, but in many cases, they are earning wages that would require them to file a tax return. So those parents would go and, you know, have their ITINs, they would have their state wages and that sort of thing evaluated by the state of New Jersey, because the state has access to all of the tax records and whatnot. So in many cases, even if parents are non-tax filers, they will ask for wage documents and other qualifying documents that the student may have to supply. So whether a student is a U.S. citizen applying through FAFSA, looking to be tag eligible through the state of New Jersey, or they're simply applying through the alternative app, the potential for the state to ask for more documentation is always there. Make sure you're going to njgrants.org and reviewing that to-do list. What is a request for review? So let's say, based on 2022, there have been great changes in your household since that year, that in 2022, things were looking better financially than they are now, because since then, one or more parents has experienced a loss of employment. In many cases, perhaps unemployment benefits have run out already or expired. There has been a separation or divorce. And so the 2022 tax return may have listed 2 parent incomes, and now there may need to be an adjustment made for just the one. Death or disability, or medical expenses that were paid and annotated on a Schedule A of the 2022 or later tax return. So if there have been situations like that, those unusual circumstances where there has been a significant financial change in your household, and you don't believe the FAFSA is accounting for that, we certainly have a review process called a request for review. Some schools call it a professional judgment, but that form would be made available on our website starting in May. So this is not something that you would do right now. You would fill out the FAFSA in accordance with the 2022 tax information. You would simply report it as the FAFSA is requesting. And then in May of 2024, when the request for review form becomes available on the Montclair State website, you would log on, download that form, and fill it out. The Montclair State Financial Aid Office would review. We would request additional documentation from you. And it's actually my direct supervisor, who is our Associate Director of Compliance, who would be conducting this review. And she's been in the business for a number of years and is phenomenal at what she does. So definitely something I've seen where she would, take every effort to review that for families, even for the smallest dollar potential. If the review shows that it's not eligible for some reason, in some cases, the changes that took place were significant to you, but not in terms of the FAFSA. We can't make adjustments to every situation. So for example, if someone, knock on wood, lost their primary home, to a terrible disaster, let's say, the primary home is not listed on the FAFSA. So that's not something that we can change directly through the FAFSA. Could we certainly look at that in terms of unusual circumstances, something to consider in perhaps a financial aid appeal after you've received your original award offer or college financing plan? Certainly, we can look at that perhaps. But in terms of this formal review that I'm talking about, that would not be a scenario that's on the FAFSA, and therefore she would send home a letter that basically says we couldn't make this change. In other cases, we can make changes, but when we run it through that SAI formula and also the HISA NJEI formula, sometimes those changes are not significant to make a change in terms of how much financial aid you're offered. And so she would send home a letter. We typically do let you know one way or the other how that review goes. Now, let's say with all good faith involved, you initiate this review and we find that you accidentally underreported on the FAFSA. Like maybe you should have included an asset or an investment or something that would actually cause you to have normally qualified for less aid. That's not a request for review, that's a FAFSA correction. We would not process that request for review. Okay, so we're not going to use the request for review as a way to penalize you or audit you. In some cases, if there is a great conflict of information, we may suggest that you correct that FAFSA or initiate a verification, like that audit I mentioned. We may push that if it's a big change. But in most cases, we would simply say the request for review is not the proper vehicle here, and you're not qualifying for that review. So just make sure that you're reading through the request for review webpage, or talking with a financial aid counselor very carefully about your situation so that we can vet whether or not this is an appropriate review for you. And the request for review is actually a 2-part process. We conduct verification first, which means we are actually correcting your FAFSA. We're making sure it's accurate before we continue, and then we make the adjustment on your behalf. So requests for reviews take time. The form will open in May. You will base all of your decisions off of the college financing plan with the financial aid offer you're originally given, because that's the best information we have. We don't know what the request for review outcome would be. And typical requests for reviews can take 6 to 8 weeks to process because they are so in-depth. And depending on your circumstances, there may be documents we ask for that will take you time to procure for us. So definitely worth thinking about, but let us know on an individual basis so that we can have those, one-on-one conversations about your specific situation. Okay. Running a little over. I'm going to try to speed up. Remember, financial aid is not a gift. In most cases, families will have some sort of form of financial responsibility. And the earlier you start this process, the better, which is why I'm encouraging you to set up those FSA IDs now. We will process your FAFSA once a student is accepted into the university. And since the FAFSA process is so delayed this year, again, the government is not sending us any copies of those new FAFSAs until the end of January. So once the end of January comes, that's when we'll actually begin, like all other schools, to review your eligibility and get back to you. Accepted students will be sent a college financing plan, which will show an estimate of the costs, the tuition and fees, minus their offered financial aid, so that you can have a real sense, bottom line, of what you may pay for school. The tuition and fees that we show you are typically based off of the current year, because that's the most accurate information we have at this time. And there's always the potential for, differences in tuition and fees and that sort of thing, but that's not unique to Montclair State. We are giving you the most accurate and full information that we have available at the time that we're sending you out that college financing plan. And Montclair's montclair.edu is a very robust website. You can go on there, search for Red Hawk Central or financial aid, and you'll find all of this information. And this presentation, as well as the slides and other webinars, will be housed on the admissions website. Now to our wonderful questions. Okay, let me see if I can go through this with you. Thank you all for hanging out with me. We still have 159 people here. All right, let's see. On the FAFSA, if you are on Social Security disability or you don't file a FAFSA, a federal tax return, again, the government will have you still link your consent for them to pull IRS information over. Typically, Social Security disability is not considered reportable on the FAFSA. If we're talking about state disability funds that you may receive, the only type of disability that they do ask you to report are privatized disability benefits. So standard Social Security disability benefits are typically not reported as income on the FAFSA. Let's see, I'm hopped through. I answered some of these questions already. Negative SAIs. We do see that they do have negative SAIs coming up on the new FAFSA. Again, these numbers correspond to a chart that lets financial aid offices know how much federal grants a student may qualify for, along with other federal aid programs. So what that means to the formula basically is that a family has a low ability to be able to provide financially toward their child's education. It does not mean that that SAI corresponds with what you actually have to pay. So anytime you see the SAI, that is not your bill, that's not how much you owe, that's not how much aid you're even given. That is a separate number that the FAFSA has computed that is put onto a federal chart that then lets the schools know how much you get. So it's really only meant there as a gauge for us, and your FAFSA submission summary will explain what the SAI is in a little bit more detail, and we'll give you some more information there. But I don't want you to get tripped up over that number. Your real best bet is to compare the college financing plans from every school. What is the tuition and fees? Public versus private, 2-year versus 4-year, whether or not your student will be living on campus or not, minus the offered financial aid. What is the bottom line price comparison from school to school? Benefits of work study, we went through that a little bit. We have a full-fledged student employment page, and we do go into those benefits during the orientation presentation. If I'm an international student that needs financial aid and can't use the FAFSA, we do have a global engagement office through the International Student Admissions Office, but it would not be a FAFSA or application that my office uses. Generally, international students must show ability to pay before they are admitted or enroll. So I would encourage you to get in touch with the Global Engagement Office so that they can refer you to any resources that they may be aware of within your home country. Do you need to create separate FSA IDs, 2 or more children? We explain that everyone needs their own FSA IDs. Merit money for twins. So I give credit to every parent of multiples out there, especially in college. But merit money is based on academic achievement, and the admissions office has full information on their scholarship programs and how that operates. You would get in touch with them if you have unusual circumstances outside of that, such as having twins going to college at the same time. They could, give you more information there. Let's see. Does rental property have to be added as a home? It's not going to be considered a home, but it is an investment. So again, rental properties that are separate from your primary residence would have to have their current market value minus their mortgage, and that difference would be reported as an asset. If you rent, let's say, the upstairs of your primary home, because that's a unique one, but we see it, right? A 2-family home, you rent the upstairs, you're actually going to take your current market value of the whole house, you're going to divide it in half, and then you're going to divide the remaining mortgage amount in half, and you're going to do the math. So you're going to do the same math, current market value minus outstanding mortgage divided by 2, because you're removing your primary home from that, and you're reporting just the top portion as what would be considered an asset. Should I report my 401k? Typically, 401ks, I'd have to double check the investments, but they do ask for you to report your investments, retirement accounts and things through your work. Typically not, unless they are specific Roth IRAs and whatnot separate from your primary employer's plans. So definitely when you're going on to the FAFSA, because everyone has unique investment accounts, you want to read through the little asterisk there that guides you on exactly what type of retirement funds or investments you would be reporting. I hesitate to give generic guidance, like very broadly, on a webinar, especially that's been recorded for your use, because everyone kind of has unique vehicles that they're using. And I don't want to have one type of retirement fund misinterpreted, and then you're filling out the FAFSA wrong. Generally, pull up your investment accounts, get everything in order, and compare that against what the FAFSA guidance is so that you can make sure you're reporting the right amounts there. Are NJ grants applicable to out-of-state residents? No. New Jersey residents are evaluated by HESA for New Jersey state aid. And in order to qualify, if you're planning to move to New Jersey, you have to establish New Jersey residency for 1 calendar year before you enroll at a New Jersey college or university. And that's also to qualify for in-state tuition, that you have to, have New Jersey residency established and meet other criteria. An out-of-state tuition differential waiver. We do not have a tuition differential waiver for out-of-state students. We have a process by which someone who started out-of-state but then becomes a New Jersey resident can petition to qualify for an in-state tuition eventually. But that information is posted on our website, and admissions will be able to guide you through that process. Again, very specific and particular. Definitely would have to go through your situation to make sure that we understand, what your plans are so that we can guide you appropriately. If your child filled out EOF wrong, sounds like a very specific situation. If you believe that there was a mistake made on your admissions application, or you're concerned that something happened there that should be corrected, please get in touch with the admissions office right away, and they'll be able to guide you. If I'm transferring, would I be eligible for the grant meant for juniors or seniors? We have a full webpage, on Garden State Guarantee. So if you go to montclair.edu and type in Garden State Guarantee in the search bar, you'll pull up the exhaustive list of criteria. I can't get into the nitty-gritty details right now simply because we're running very short on time. We're over, but check that out and then contact the financial aid office with questions or concerns. Does a student and both parents have to apply for the FAFSA? I answered this live. It's the student applying for the FAFSA if they're attending Montclair State. And sometimes if a parent is a college student on their own, they would be filling out their own FAFSA. But in terms of having your child start at Montclair State, it's under their FSA ID on studentaid.gov. Okay, we answered the live. Definitely contact us with in-state tuition questions. What options do I have that are not loans so I can be debt-free? Debt-free is an incredible, goal, and something that I hope every college student can achieve. If not, because loans are a reality in some cases. Going back to my earlier slides, it would be exploring filling out the FAFSA first so that we can evaluate you for grants, filling out your admissions application so you can be automatically reviewed for merit scholarships if you qualify for any, making certain choices in terms of how many credits you're taking, whether you're commuting or not, to keep your costs low. Montclair State has a flat tuition program, or tuition rate rather. So if your son or daughter are taking 12 to 18 credits a semester, they are charged the same flat full-time tuition rate. Most students will need to take 15 credits a semester to graduate within the 4-year time frame. So most students would aim for that 15 credits a semester. If they adjust well to the rigor of college coursework, I would encourage them to speak with their advisor first before they do this in their second semester or even sophomore year on, just because we don't want them to have their academics negatively impacted. But they could take up to 18 credits and be charged the same flat tuition rate. So I have some creative students who do that. I have other students too who take some of their gen eds, their core classes, during the winters and summers at community colleges when they're freshmen or sophomores. There is an approval process through that they'd have to go through first before they just go off and do it on their own. But if they earn a certain grade, usually a C and up, and they've gotten the proper approval to take those gen eds at, let's say, community over the summer, you would be paying the community college rate and getting those credits transferred back to Montclair in most cases. So there are rules, there are limitations to how many credits that can be done, which classes qualify. But again, your student would work that out with advising so that they could be appropriately guided. And that would be a great way to reduce indebtedness over time if you're looking to save money. Can you apply to Scholarship Universe before you start college? You can look for outside scholarships now as a high school senior. Go to your high school student portal, log in, see what resources your school counseling offices offer. Research those other resources that I mentioned through your employers, through your unions, through your churches and organizations. Definitely you can apply to outside scholarships starting now and forward. Scholarship Universe is unique to Montclair State students. So your student would have to be accepted and enrolled at Montclair to begin that. But definitely a resource that we encourage our students to use throughout their time here. So you have to apply to HESA separately. Nope. HESA, you go to the FAFSA, you fill it out, you're reviewed for state aid. There may be some state scholarships like the NJ Best Scholarship. If you have a 529 plan through the NJ Best program, you'd have to explore that and read through the criteria to qualify. But you can go to njgrants.org and read all about the state programs. The primary one, New Jersey TAG, does not require a separate application. That's automatically reviewed for when the state receives the FAFSA. If I file my income jointly with my husband and the student, my son also filed, why does the student also have to fill out the FAFSA? Basically, they're reviewing the household contributions. What income and what assets do you have as a household? So the student's information will be used, of course, on the FAFSA, and then the parent contributors within that household will also be accounted for to gauge what financial strength and contributions you have as a family unit. Is FAFSA only eligible? We went through FAFSA eligibility already. FAFSA application opens at the end of December. You can add up to 20 colleges on the FAFSA. Can I schedule an appointment to meet with a financial aid counselor? To file the FAFSA application, I wouldn't be able as a financial aid counselor to go line item by line item with you. It just takes too long. But what you could do is go to studentaid.gov and contact their customer service, and they actually do offer that. There are also webinars online through HESA, and your high school may actually offer a FAFSA completion date or workshop. So check through that. There are a lot of them happening at this time of year, and we're glad to help you through general questions. But until you decide to commit to Montclair, it's kind of hard for us to guide you through fully, because we may need to collect documents from you and that sort of thing. Most students want to commit to a school before they're really providing a lot of heavy duty detail to us. But I would say that if you're having trouble filling out the FAFSA, we're always there to answer general questions, but go to studentaid.gov, get that help that you need directly, because oftentimes you're applying to more than one school and having to meet multiple school priority filing deadlines. So again, ours is March 1st. Make sure you get that done by that point. And if you do have really great concerns, let's say you went onto student aid, you really tried, you're getting stuck, you're getting frustrated, don't hesitate to reach out to us for shorter appointments, for questions that can be handled within, I would say, 20 minutes or so. I would encourage you to either go to one of these types of webinars that we offer, or on the admissions site, there are ways that you can schedule a telecounseling appointment with a financial aid counselor. You can also schedule a telecounseling with an admissions counselor if you had, let's say, scholarship based on merit questions or other admissions related concerns as you go through the application process. So yeah, there are ways to schedule an appointment, but filling out the FAFSA simply is a lengthy process. We can answer general questions. We cannot go line item by line item with you as much as we might like to. Does a step parent need an ID login? Yes, if the step parent is married to the biological parent in that household, they would need to be that second parent on the FAFSA, or that second contributor on the FAFSA. Both parents in a two-parent household, whether they are both biological or step parent or adoptive, they both will need their individual FSA IDs. And then their child will need their own, all with different email addresses. Studentaid.gov is the website. I'm just kind of going through. If you forgot your FSA ID, you can recover it at studentaid.gov. You will need to have access to the email address it was associated with. I have helped students in situations where the parent or the student lost access, but generally you have to contact the customer care number through studentaid.gov. And oftentimes they have you send copies of your driver's license, your social security card. They really vet your identity before they reset that information if you do not have access to that email address. Again, it is a very protective system, and they're trying to prevent identity theft issues. So make sure that your email address is one that you have access to when your son or daughter graduates high school. Don't use high school email addresses. Don't use email addresses for your work. If you may change your employer one day, use a personal email address you always have access to. Each parent needs their own FSA ID. They cannot be shared. The FAFSA is only filled out under the student's name. As parents, you're signing the FAFSA, but you're not filling out the FAFSA on your own. Primary residence is not listed on the FAFSA. Do not include your primary home as an asset. Let me clarify the schools that you're reporting on the FAFSA. When you list multiple schools on the FAFSA, you're only submitting FAFSA the one time, and then the Federal Student Administration is sending multiple copies, one to each school and to the state of New Jersey. So you're not actually going into the FAFSA every time and submitting individual applications to every school. You're listing all of the schools at once with that first and hopefully only submission. If you transfer from a community college, you're filling out the FAFSA brand new, filing it by March 1st, getting Montclair State School on there, school code on there, which is 002617, or just looking us up and listing us as your new college. You can change, the question is, can I change the email address that's used in my FSA ID? And yes, you can, but you have to log into your FSA ID profile on studentaid.gov first, change the information there, and then usually what they have you do is they will send a confirmation email to each of those email addresses, the old one and the new one, and have you confirm and verify that on each email address. And they do that because they want the old email address to confirm, yes, I gave permission for my email address to be changed on my FSA ID. And then for the new one, they'll have you, verify it like you normally would. But they're protective. So if you know you're going to change your work email to a different one, you will probably have to confirm on both your old work email and the personal email address you're setting that to. I'll put it in the chat. The Montclair State school code for FAFSA purposes is 002617. You can simply type in Montclair and search for us as well, Montclair State University. Great questions, everyone. I love these. There's no income limit for a FAFSA for filing. It's just a matter of whether or not you'll qualify for grants. Every student will qualify for a Stafford student loan, which for freshmen is up to $5,500. There are two different types, subsidized and unsubsidized, but in cases of high income, usually those students would have all unsubsidized loan. Subsidized just means that the government pays the interest toward a certain amount, a maximum of $3,500 while the student is in school. Unsubsidized means that interest will start to build on that loan while the student is in school. The students, when they're borrowing a Stafford loan, as long as they're taking 6 credits a semester, they are not required to start repayment while they're in school. Students can always pay toward their loans voluntarily while they're in school if they can afford to do so, because it's never a bad idea to pay down your debt. Of course, the lenders are not going to turn down loan repayment funds from you, but generally, the benefits of filing FAFSA, despite high income perhaps, would be that you would have access to those low interest rate Stafford loans with no credit check requirements for the student. Your student would still be able to pursue a student assistant job, even if they do not qualify for work study. And if your circumstances change at all, we would have your FAFSA ready to go to pursue one of those requests for reviews that I mentioned earlier, in the case of like income changes in your household. And we would already have that application ready to go. So it's definitely a good idea to still file FAFSA, even if you're not sure you'll qualify for grants. It never hurts. It's something we would encourage everyone to do. Yes, this webinar will be posted to the admissions website. So that was one of the questions. Middle initials, doesn't matter. From my experience, middle initials in terms of name matching really do not matter on FAFSA. It's really just important that you have the full first name and the full last name properly noted on your academic records, on the FAFSA records, and with the state. So just make sure that you're getting that properly noted. And spelling is always important. Hyphenated names are always important to have fully shown there. But middle initials are never really an issue for us unless we're trying to confirm identity and there's a mismatch for some reason. So in my case, I'd say it's okay to leave them out, the middle initials. We don't typically run into problems with that. If you've already been accepted, so the question is, if I get accepted before I have the FAFSA, which is a lot of you actually on this presentation, maybe you've already applied to Montclair, I hope, and you've been accepted, the FAFSA is not open right now. The admissions office is not basing your acceptance on the FAFSA, and we don't consider it late because our priority filing deadline is March 1st. So the FAFSA is opening at the end of this month. You have until March 1st to get it done. I encourage you to do that between January and February, just in case you run into any issues, to make sure that you can still meet our March 1st deadline. We didn't really touch on payments outside of the FAFSA, but if the financial aid is not sufficient to cover tuition and fees, or you're not looking to borrow loans, you're looking to opt into a payment plan, that sort of thing, we do go over that at Accepted Students Day. We get into a deeper dive on that during orientation. But generally, you would, once you're accepted and deposited, the bills come out in July, they're due in August. We get into that full timeline scope later on, and the payments are made directly into the student portal, or they are made through the payment plan that a student would opt into as a way to possibly pay out of pocket. So definitely, if you're just looking, if your question is more, how do I commit to Montclair? You would definitely be able to submit your deposit through the student portal in Slate, I believe, or through Nest if that's been on your acceptance letter. You just have to make sure that if you're running into any login issues, or maybe you try to access the payment portal and it's not working for some reason, that you get in touch with the admissions office and they'll be glad to help you through that process. Is child support considered income? Child support traditionally has been considered an asset on the FAFSA. So the traditional FAFSA does have that listed. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember how the SAI factors that in, but as you complete it, you would want to be very cautious and make sure you're answering those questions. Again, especially if you've noted child support on your tax return, this information may be actually pulled in for you to some degree. And you would see it kind of masked there in the appropriate fields. But if there's been a change, like let's say your child is aging out of qualifying for child support, then we're getting into request for review territory. So if in 2022 you received child support, and now going into college, that source of support is ending, that's something that we would have you discuss with our office and possibly open up a request for review to address. Someone mentioned a question about a loan going up since they accepted it. I'm wondering, because it's so early and some of you may have accepted some loans, I'm hoping that this person is talking as an accepted student. If this individual is a current student and has questions, current students and actually accepted students are always welcome to contact Red Hawk Central, which is our one-stop shop for financial aid, student accounts, and registrar. They are phenomenal at what they do. Let me put the website in the chat here for you all. Again, if you go to montclair.edu and you're just typing in Red Hawk Central, this will pop up. And they can certainly help prospective students who are not sure on the way to go. But at this point in time, because you're still making such careful decisions, admissions is really your primary contact until you get into the meat and bones of how to navigate this process. I'll put that in the chat as well for the admissions link. And if you go through the admissions resources, again, there is a way to schedule a telecounseling appointment with an admissions counselor or with a financial aid counselor. So if your loan amount has changed or gone up, there is a way for us to answer that to you. I'm just not sure what would cause that. Typically, that's caused by FAFSA changes. Like if you indicated that you were a freshman and then you went back on and said, oh, I'm a transfer student, I'm going to be a sophomore, really, that could change your Stafford loan eligibility. That would cause an increase. So again, to Brandon, who asked the question in the chat, the Q&A, if you notice any loan amount changing or going up, our office can adjust that with you or discuss that with you, but you have to get in touch with the admissions office and schedule a telecounseling with financial aid so that we can look into your specific account. Typically, loans just don't go up for no reason. Something has triggered that to happen. And the only ways that happens is if your class level, like freshman to sophomore, has changed, or maybe your parent was applying to a Parent Plus loan and got turned down and now you qualify for more, or you became an independent student under unusual circumstances and that has changed things. But at this time of year, that really sounds like it's coming from a currently enrolled student, because we have not sent out college financing plans to anyone. We have not received 2024-25 FAFSAs yet. And so I'm thinking that the best place to start, Brandon, would be to contact Red Hawk Central. It sounds like you may be currently a student here, and we'd be glad to go over that with you and see what's going on. FAFSA info goes directly to HISA, but we still have to go to their site and establish an ID with them. Yes. So that's all the time we have tonight. I really do appreciate all of the extra time that you've spent with us. And please do get in touch, with admissions or the financial aid office. We look forward to seeing you for any future webinars and also further presentations like at Accepted Students Day. Have a nice evening.